Great. Graham, what's your perspective on this in terms of important things and how that adds value?
Yeah, it's funny. I was similar to David in terms of I sort of read it as, I read your question as like, is it the physical estate? So is that all about the tools? And I definitely would advocate cloud, having been an on-premise man for many years and hear about all this cloud stuff and then get to experience it and go, this is great. You know, I can turn it up, turn it down. I can spend as much as little. You know, it's still quite complicated. It's not as simple as everyone thinks. And also, I think the thing I've learned is, I remember being at a company where they bought the best of every tool and they spent millions of pounds on integrators integrating the best tools and couldn't get the best tools to communicate to each other. So actually, sometimes you just need to choose a bit of a family of tools. So in our case, you know, we're using you know, sort of Microsoft family, which has everything from, you know, a data platform to visualization, etc. But you know, sticking within the tool, that you get advantages within that. I think my real answer to the question is back to this people thing, and I think I would say I remember once being asked to read a book, and it was all about sort of data strategy, and they asked me to write a sort of chapter, and I sort of started this chapter about building a team to sort of exploit your data estate and also build your data estate. And I said, you know, you can do the, you know, I'm sorry to have the football analogy, but you can do the Man City option, which is, if you go back a few years, they bought the best players in the world, put them in a team and won nothing. Won absolutely nothing for several years because they had a bunch of stars. You can put some good players who work well together in a team, and I'd say the same for a data team. You need to have some good engineers, some good analysts, some good scientists, all the skill set, have a good bunch of people. You know, if you're a bit weak in one area, actually, you know, I've had some very strong analysts who could make up for maybe some weaker engineers to start with, and vice versa. But actually, you need that good team across all of the data disciplines, and that's the thing for me that has definitely helped me most in most recent years.
And that bit about having the team and the rest of it, I think you know, bringing that together. We talk about. Well, we coined a term, data parenting, and did a paper on data parenting, which was a bit of a blend between how organisations look after the data, but also how they look after the people that are supposed to be managing that data as well. Those two things together. Have you got any examples of sort of, if you like, your craziest things that you've seen when it comes to data parenting within the organisations that you've worked with? Examples of things that just are nonsensical, perhaps?
You know what? When David first introduced the concept to me, I hadn't heard it before, to be honest. And I had to go and read his article, and I thought, yeah, it was a little bit linear for me in some respects, you know, because let's be honest, people regress, and you can go backwards, you know. But generally, for most, it's similar to sort of, I suppose, data, in that it tends to go through that sort of, you know, growing up, maturing. But equally, and this is where I suppose the where it's gone crazy, or maybe it's been a disaster. What I have seen, and I've seen it happen to companies that I was at, that I left, and I've seen it happen to other companies, that when the leader or the leadership team disappears from that organization, you can often see the sort of data discipline, the knowledge, etc., just crumbles. You know, I was at the AA for a long time. We had a big team, and in the time I left, or the time I was serving my notice, more people resigned because I had the longest notice period, and I think we lost half of the experience in data years in the company in 6 months. And that was a lot of knowledge. And what you see later on is, you know, I was data leader for 17 years. They've had 6 data leaders in 5 years, or 5 data leaders in 6 years, can't remember which way around it is. And, you know, they've all been, you know, good, and they've come in and they've tried to do something, but it hasn't worked, and then they've left for whatever reason. And you talk to people left behind trying to get stuff done, you know, the product people and the marketing people who want support, going, it's a mess. We don't know where to go to. We don't know the answer. It's not like it was before. And it's like, yeah, you suddenly realize that it can go horribly wrong, you know, in the same way as, I suppose, parenting, you know, the kids grow up and then suddenly they become, you know, delinquents or something. I don't know. It's not that different, I suppose, than parenting.
I think I was going to chip in with a football analogy, which it sounds more like the multiple Premier League managers never getting anywhere all of a sudden after being successful for many years. And I won't mention Man United at that point. And also from a parenting analogy point of view, I think it's midlife crisis and going back to being a teenager is what you just described. But there we are. That's my take on it.
Stuart, you gave me some quite good feedback. But what about crazy things have you seen?
How long we got?
Short.
So I always think I've seen everything there is to see, and then I go into a new organisation and I have my horizons broadened for me. It's probably the polite way of putting it. But I think that's part of what makes it a really interesting space to be in, because you really, when you talk about data, and we've talked about people, but I see data as a people problem. It's a people problem, and therefore, because people are interesting and different and have different approaches, they take different approaches and they behave in a different way. And so actually, data modernization or data parenting is a very human discipline in many. So it's quite a human discipline in many respects. And I guess I characterize quite a lot of what I do as kind of social work, where you find yourself going into an organization and going, well, there, it'll be all right. Honestly, you're not the only people to have seen things happen this way. Craziest moment, I really would be picking from a very deep pool. I think, without kind of naming any particular names, I've seen countless organizations spend huge sums hiring very expensive data science teams to quote unquote make us data driven, and then finding out or wondering why that hasn't really fixed the problem. And the football manager analogy is a really good one, because the amount of time you actually have to quote unquote make a difference seems to be getting shorter and shorter and shorter as the pace of, if you like, digital transformation picks up. So people's patience seems to become thin, and you certainly see organizations trying to jump to, well, just fix my problem, just get me to the answer, without wanting to build the foundations in a sort of in a rigorous way. I think is probably the way I would describe it. So you tend to find that if you hire in a data scientist and they can't get access to the data they need, or they've got little or no confidence in that data, they're going to spend 80% or more of their time trying to source the data. Or even worse, I've seen data science teams tweaking their algorithms, brackets which aren't very well documented, to get to an answer that the business finds palatable, and then the business makes a bet on that because that seems to be about the right answer, as opposed to, but what is the data actually telling me, and do I really have trust in that? Is it really transparent? And I think that for me fundamentally fails to address the underlying problems of which data do I have, why do I have it, should I have it, is it of acceptable condition, do I know how I'm going to use it, what outcomes am I going to expect, do I trust it, do my stakeholders trust it, does it drive value for me as an organization? And I think that kind of chuck a bunch of money, and you can equally say the same thing about chuck a bunch of money at some really expensive tooling. It won't fix your problem unless you take a rigorous approach to what am I actually trying to achieve. And the teaming thing's a really important one, because you don't want just a team of data ninjas, right? You want some people that can speak to people as well, right? So you want the change management aspect is massive. So you've got to have this kind of multifaceted team that can kind of embed itself and blend in with, and I'll say the rest of the business, but actually you're all part of the same, you're all part of the same organization anyway, generally speaking. So rather than being an afterthought, that's really important, because that's where you can really start to address, well, what are we collectively trying to achieve, as opposed to, oh, the data team are going to fix that for me, or why haven't the data team fixed that for me? Actually, I would turn, and I have done in my last role, turn the question around again. No, your data, what are you going to do, right? What do you need to do? How are you going to address this? Don't just point the finger at the data guys and go, they will magically pull a rabbit out of the hat, because it doesn't work that way.
And Joel, I mean, that does that resonate with you? And what crazy moments have you experienced?
It does resonate with me, and I think a lot of the conversation is focused around the cultural aspect to it, and that's right. That's why it's so hard just to come bring in and affect change, and it's difficult to do it quickly. I mean, I've worked in an organization where there was a subset of people who were deemed too important to have to worry about creating good data, even though they were creating core data for the organization. And so another team was started up. I used to call them the data fairies, but I think data parenting is probably a better kind of term. But actually, yeah, just to talk about the data fairies going around fixing people's, rather than actually these people being coached and supported to change it. And whether there's some system validation, whether there's some process changes, whether there's some mindset changes, maybe it's a bit of all of that, but actually just bringing in, rather than fixing the problem, bringing people in to keep topping up the leaky bucket just struck me as crackers.